Dan works and practices to educate his colleagues, clients, and students of what architecture can bring to elevate experience and the responsibilities that come with this ever-optimistic endeavor. Dan received his education at the Rhode Island School of Design, including 2 years studied in Rome and association with Chado Salvetti Architects. Prior to establishing his own practice, he was an associate and studio head at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, Chicago from 1981 to 87. Dan is a recipient of a National Endowment of the Arts Traveling Fellowship in 1980, the CCAIA Young Architect Award in 1985, AIA Fellowship for Design in 1998, Chicago Tribune's Chicagoan of the Year in Architecture with Lawrence Kearns in 2008, and AIA Illinois' Nathan Rickert Clifford Award for Architectural Education in 2017. He has served as interim director for both the Brown Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts and the UIC School of Architecture, and has been counseling architect educator to Auburn University's Rose Studio since 2002. His work spans the gamut of project types: public institutions, nonprofit organizations, and private commissions. He draws to see, to test, to explain, and to build well places of authenticity. So for me, this is not so much about an introduction, but a note of gratitude. Thanks, Dan. But if I may, please welcome Dan Wheeler.
Thank you, Gregory, for that more than generous introduction to Nilo, to Madison, wherever you are. We had a group of Kansas students come to the office this past spring and made a connection and made this happen. And really, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about what I love about architecture. Today is not going to be talking about Wheeler Kearns Architects. This is a much more personal, my lectures are typically trying to ground work within your personal life, and each one of you are different. This is just one person talking about one journey, and each of you are on your way to kind of finding your own. And by the way, there are some chairs up here if you want to sit down. So anyway, I have a lot of slides today, but I think really the thing that I want to kind of convey before we get going is this idea of influence from different fields, or through fields and across fields. My sister is a poet. My parents were both designers. I get influenced by people that I meet on a daily basis, and those become ingredients in the work that I do and that we all do. And to imagine that the architect is not necessarily a technician, but more of a orchestrator and a developer of a narrative. People don't hire architects to do permit drawings. That's part of our job, but really what they want to do is they want to hire you to be able to say why they did something, why they invested in this, why they did something to improve not only their life, but as our architect, as our job is also to improve the context in which we build within. And Lord knows when you look around the world, around the country and so forth, we see quite a few happy clients. They got what they wanted, but we also see a lot of damaged goods in terms of our communities. And so an architect needs to kind of convey the sense of optimism that we have to making the patient, the client, the community better, but also the fear that we're going to do it harm. And so with that, let's see. So this is, I grew up in Minnesota, and I oftentimes kind of go back to Minnesota and kind of the flatlands a week and kind of hanging out and just being alone. Each one of us are, in a way, alone with our own thoughts and what we could bring to the table. Several years ago, actually more than several, in 2001, I was asked to give a lecture at the Graham Foundation, and at that time I was a conflicted soul, and I still am, because we have been trained to think that things are bad, or maybe no things are better. What happens if we do a green building? What happens if it's not so green? What if it's a temporary building or versus permanent? And those are kind of issues that we grapple with. Architecture is not a black and white situation. It is we operate within the gray zones. And so today you'll see a little bit of that activity. I teach. The focus of my studio, my fourth year studio at UIC right now, is focusing on this idea of perfection or imperfection. Perfection, as you might convey, is an architectural discipline, a rigor that one brings, an ordering system of some form that we try to convey within our work. But then understanding that the human hand that actually makes these pieces of wood or places those plants and so forth are going to make that perfection imperfect in a certain way, and can we live with that? And so this is a painting by Agnes Martin that had a quote to say that her work obviously is about perfection, but she is full well aware that it's going to be imperfect. We look at kind of our perfected goal of, let's say, an ordering system, and then the quotes of Guy Bend, where they actually did some stuff that was necessarily imperfect, and there was a humanity, a humanness to that actually connects with us in a way that maybe the one on the left, we get that pretty quickly. And so, we had that, Julie, my wife, who's here this evening, she's an architect. She used to stamp my drawings before I was registered. And we had an opportunity to visit Zumter's chapel this October, and the greatest moment of that chapel, it's a perfect chapel, God, it's perfect. But the greatest moment is this kind of collision of, a human little into this perfectness. And that's the thing that kind of makes you experience, I'm in the kind of the bad world and I'm going up into the perfect world, and that threshold is really remarkable. The grid is imperfect. We can relish in the fact that there is orientation. Growing up in Minnesota or Iowa or Kansas, we're understanding that the Jeffersonian grid, that perfect thing, is kind of dividing stuff off. But even within that, there's the Guy Bend kind of tapestry that allows us to kind of make a particular authentic place within that. And more I'm connecting to work and trying to be conscious of how do we bring the humanity into the world of Revit and the world of absolute laser precision. That precision can be evident in a work by Walter DeMaria, which you probably well know. It's 1 mile by 1 kilometer of little stainless spikes. They go down and they're polished and they go up to a particular point. You can put a piece of glass on top. And the thing that's not remarkable is the reflectance of the sun on those stakes in themselves, but it's actually the undulation of the landscape, and so certain ones are high, certain ones are low, and so that imperfection of DeMaria's work. This is a work by Vespen Ayton, who's a Norwegian architect that we were fortunate to meet. This is a perfect rectangle if you look at it in plan, but as this rectangle makes a relationship with the landscape, it becomes every moment along that path as you navigate through this very perfect, pristine, natural world is a different experience. So a little bit about me. I grew up in at 1323 North 20th Street Northwest in Rochester, Minnesota. This is the house my father designed. This is off Google Earth, and so it's worse for wear right now, but this used to be just a nice gray, orange door, not the screen doors and the side lights. This is propped off. Must have slipped that off. Okay. This is where my father worked. This is an Aero Saarinen IBM plant. That was the main thing. But on the weekends, my parents were designers, Danish Modern and so forth, but every weekend we'd go to places like this, go into Hattie's Antiques, and I didn't know what the world, I was like this high and going in, whoa, it's dark, and oh, I can explore and I can find some weird stuff. Okay, so then I grew up a little bit. I had a car, had a bike with my sister. Every summer we would go to my father's house, where my dad grew up in Chatham. I used to have hair in Risty, and then spent a couple years in Rome studying, and so this is Palazzo Cenci. At that point, at that point we were carrying around these big cameras with lenses, big ones, small ones, and really heavy, and all this stuff, and it was just too much stuff to carry. And so I just started carrying a sketchbook and then trying to kind of learn how to draw. This is an individual act. You're just drawing by yourself, and whether you're sitting at the Cafe Greco or having some olives somewhere, and you can do this every moment of your day, right? You don't have to take your iPhone out all the time. This is a project. This is what I call my Kansas Highway project. Okay, my mother grew up in Topeka, and so we would go to Topeka from Rochester, and we would be driving through Iowa, and whether this is Kansas or Iowa, all I remember, it was flat, and it was boring. So I thought in school at Risty, well, what happens if I just did cut and fill and took a football field of earth from here, put it on the other side, and so all of a sudden you're driving, like this for a while, and then you flatten back down. So anyway, Kansas. Drawing then led to working in practice with Michelle Savetti. I've got a lot of slides, so I'm going to kind of go quickly. And that led my interest also into cut and fill and landscape. So this is a monument that has no nomenclature, no signatory architectural element other than a captured space that captured a landscape and light. Moved to Chicago. Never been there before in my life. Chicago is a great place. The Midwest is a great place to learn how to build well because we have climate still, hopefully. So it gets cold, it gets hot and humid. As any young, self-respecting architect, you live in Nice. So Julie and I, this is 860, 880. We lived in 910. It was just like a maple floor, 2 cord couches, little Japanese mat, a tree. It was like perfect. We wore suits, black belts, white shirts to Skidmore. That was the life. Okay, we had 2 kids. We had to figure out what to do with them, so we ended up buying the only affordable house in Lincoln Park, which was this one. And as time has gone on and soccer trophies have aggregated, it's filled with stuff. And so this is the interior of our house that was renovated by a fellow from Frank Lloyd Wright's studio, Arthur Clara. And it is just filled with pieces and parts that are part memory, and in part, so that's a little vignette. Okay, never leave it well enough alone. This is Raymond Loewy, industrial designer fame, and this is really a title that you can kind of hang your hat on for your lifetime, which is to say, we are here to make things better, to accept that yes, this is good, but can it be better? And so this is where our office is. You're welcome to come to Chicago. We're right across from the Monadnock. We're on the 2nd floor above 7-Eleven. The coffee is always on. Intelligentsia coffee is really good stuff. We do a lot of work with Intelligentsia. And understanding, though, that we are just a blip in this kind of timeline. This is a timeline that Stanley Targerman started, and it goes on for pages and pages of understanding that our role is to teach others to kind of carry on. So just like in academia, we're training you. Ultimately, 40 years from now, 30 years from now, you're going to be training others. And so that we're just like a snowflake that's going to go away relatively quickly. What we do, our proudest achievement, is the people that we do and we communicate with, and we have conversations about how to make the world better. Basically, from right here is our office, and then this is some friends from the first project we ever did. This was at our 30-year kind of visit to a house in every year we have 18, 19 people. Every year we take an office trip. We're going to Mexico City in a couple weeks for 3 days. We go and visit things so we can all collaborate and say, hey, remember when I saw that? And it's a joint understanding. It's not something that we're looking from a digital file. And we've done work in many, many different idioms, whether restoration, new construction, prefabrication, and we do a lot of nonprofit and institutional work. One of the only defining things about the office is we don't do developer work. We don't contribute to making money for others. We want people to have vested interest in the work that they do. Okay, so influence around fields. You know, when the guys came over from Kansas, we sat in this room. This is one of our conference rooms, and it's filled with books. Books are, if you have a project that doesn't have a book, it's a bad project, right? Okay, so, you know, relish history, try to kind of gain as much from it, because that's what went before, so we can further it. And then up above, oh, by the way, on the shelf, there's a bunch of books that come in from John Galt and Dan Rockhill that, you know, so we're watching you. We're watching you. We're passing these books around and making sure that people are out of it. And meanwhile, up on the shelf, we have sketchbooks. And essentially, this is, I think, as you'll see, you know, the best thing that we can do is have these, you know, this is my current sketchbook right now. We're working this morning from 5 o'clock. You know, so this is my way of kind of my diary of work. I think that this pencil right here, this is a Blackwing Palomino, is the most dangerous tool an architect can have. It's capable of infinite line weight, right? You know, a computer is not infinite line weight, right? You make a decision. How bold can it be? This thing you can turn on a pinhead, even closer than that, and kind of define the emphasis of what we do. So you'll hear more about that. Okay. Oh, influence, evolution, iteration. I'm not a revolutionary designer. I'm one that looks at things, that looks backwards and then sees how we can evolve it. That is done by Giorgio Morandi in terms of moving bottles around for 30 years, 60 years in his apartment outside of Bologna. Maybe he doesn't have oil paint that day, so then he has a different medium, just like we might land on the planet of concrete. Next week we're going to be on CLT, and that's what the flavor of the week is. We can still take our interest of composition into those things. Just as Jens Quistgaard, the designer for dance, took his appreciation of his Nordic and Danish roots into the Viking shells, the bowls, and then evolved these things. And so this is just Jens Quistgaard right there over a 30-year span, designing one revolutionary thing, which was a combined salt shaker, pepper grinder, and the rest of it was being evolutions of form as we went along. We're opposite that. And I will note that this is teak sitting on steel. So now we have cherry, and on top of that are 500, at this point it's 552 different garden hose nozzles, which were evolving from one company, and then they would evolve it through the years, and then there'd be another competitor, and they'd say, we can do it better. And that's all we architects do, is we are competing amongst others to kind of design a better mouse. It's also done in bike design. So these are 4 bikes, track bikes that I've got. I ride regularly. And if you look at them, they're identical, but the one in the upper left is from 1946. How much evolution has taken place from 1946 to 2005? Well, you would say, a novice would say, not much. But that bike frame here has solid tubes that are consistent in wall thickness. This one is thick here, and thin there. So we have a tube protector to stiffen that element, and so if you go down on the track, you don't crush the top tube. And so again, sometimes our evolution is dramatic, and then sometimes it's actually quite quiet. There's a guy that you probably may know, Mies van der Rohe, looking out over his buildings, his first building, the Promontory, 86880, 90910, and then the Seagram's building, and essentially they were all working off of a particular module, 21 foot, which allowed you to get 2 parking spaces or 2 bedrooms, and so that was his module. And then he spent probably 20 years just evolving that one thing. How do you make that house box better? And so our job is to kind of look and improve, not to necessarily invent new form. It's Leverance. Everyone know Leverance? Sigurd Leverance? Okay, first project he did, it's kind of archetypal worker cottage. Everything's very flat, monolithic. He had then ended up kind of making these signature moves of glazing, running over the surface of a facade. And then his last project was done in concrete. He landed the land of concrete, no brick, but the same elements that he did in his very first project, you can see in his very last project. So again, what I'm trying to do is I'm now understanding that stuff I used to do, I still like doing. And trying to be understanding that each one of us has a different sensibility in terms of scale, proportion, color, and so forth. And that's what makes the world rich. And so it's part of your job to become conscious of history, but then what you bring to it. This is a really quick run through a house in terms of iteration. Milo had asked me to literally talk about the hard work that it takes in terms of design. This is a little house, not a little house. This is a house for one of the Pritzker family in Chicago. They could have hired anybody in the world. We were fortunate to get this commission. And as an architect, we are an educator, just like a doctor is going to give you 3 ways to get better. Which one do you like? We provide different instructions with pros and cons, and then help build the confidence of the client that yes, this is the way that we want to move. On the right-hand side, we have a series of images of ingredients that we want to bring into the soup. So we have Carlos Scarpa, we have Sana, we have Eero Saarinen's Miller House in Columbus, Indiana, which again, I would encourage you to go like a beeline to that if you haven't been to it. So, you know, this is the, after that big meeting right there, the only thing that came out of that meeting was that little diagram right there. And that diagram lived through, Dan Rockhill has come to Chicago, visited it. It's very different in terms of its cost per square foot, I would say. But as you're developing, okay, we've gone through schematics and now we're building 1/4-inch models, but at the same time we're building absolutely full-size mock-ups of what the implications are for a triple pane piece of glass with screen door and whatnot. So again, architecture will not get easier for you guys. It will not, but that's the fun of it. The idea is to make sure that you're overturning every rock and building the confidence that what you're doing is going to make the world a better place. Building full-size mock-ups in office buildings because the client didn't understand what an all-glass house would be. Drawings upon drawings, adding watercolors and so forth. And then going from the rough sketch to a little bit more definition to then introducing the computer at the appropriate time to kind of follow it through. It's a 45-foot cantilever building. It's a box sitting on top of 2 little stairways. How do you insulate that box and so it stays warm during the winter from an energy code? And so again, this is, you know, your client will roll over if you should talk about thermal breaks and so forth, but they can understand conceptually that you're building a big, you're wearing a parka because you know you're going to be losing energy down around your legs. And so that is, again, a means for pulling out a sketchbook or doing a little doodle that is not scripted by, AutoCAD and Revit and, Enscape. So I'm just running through. So again, this is my postgraduate work, but being the project architect on this. In our office, we have all project architects. I'm project architect on several currently, and then an assistant on others, and all the other partners and all the other staff members are the same. Here you have light ports that, again, carry back to Alto with the ceiling, Sana with the light ports that allow snow and rain and so forth to penetrate a very deep footprint. And then you start meeting weird people like Jaume Plenza, who did the crown fountain that spouts the water in Chicago. So he's from Barcelona, and this is a William Blake poem, From Heaven to Hell, that goes up through one of the courtyards. Office trip to Mexico City, the Barragan influenced the children's bedrooms. The cantilever theme that the house is based upon is influencing the stairs. It's a glass house in the city. Holy cow, I can't walk around naked in here. Well, maybe I can by designing a fence that was influenced by Barragan and understanding that if you have a bladed piece and you have them tight enough together, you can actually provide vision for the public to the gardens, but not into the interior of the house. Okay, so here's Saarinen influence, and then working through to try to kind of bring in that language into the project. And again, you have You have Pinterest sources, you have story polls that your clients are giving you that you find, but I think it's really important to understand at a deeper level the history of why they chose that, why you choose it, and so you can articulate that. So working in the gray zones. Okay, that was just, let's see, how am I doing? Oh, I'm good?
Like 20 more minutes, 30 more.
30 more? Okay, I'll go fast. This is going to be a rip-roaring thing. I've got lots to say. So, okay, so this is a little project that, again, starts with this a simple premise, a box, a little quiet building, and then we break it apart. The Kenzakuma, anti-object, so breaking this thing apart, and that becomes the entry courtyard for this little house. It's a Russian doll. We put it on a site. And then you start to say, well, what happens? And in this case, the guy used to run the Nature Conservancy, and so in this project, we wanted nature to win and break the building. And so in the breaking of the building, wood is introduced inside of this black box. These are initial sketches, construction shots, working with contractors. Again, we are not, well, you guys know much more than most, but architecture is a team sport. And you can't be a prima donna and walk in and say, oh, here I am to save the day. We're here to work with you to make this thing a better thing. This is one turned little column. This is one column that supports it, and that was it based by some knowledge of Herzog Demeron's beautiful apartment building early on in their career. And then this is just a quick, I just do hand drawings by freehand. We scan them into the sets and so forth. So anyway, so that's how that was working. And so now you get it ready for AIA, and so you try to describe what you're trying to do. You have a nice plan. Finish. So this is that finished image of the garage that's broken apart. The column that supports this little canopy. Nine-foot ceilings. Most clients that come in and they just knee-jerk, oh, I have to have a 10-foot ceiling. And so, you have to mock it up. Mock up as a 9-foot ceiling. Bruce Graham, the guy that designed the Sears Tower and the Hancock, he grew up in Bogota, Colombia. He had a series of courtyards in his house, but it had 8-foot ceilings. Beautiful intimacy. And so this is trying to kind of toe the line between that, the gray zone between client instant, oh, I have to have this, and then walking them through what the 9-foot gives you. No downlights in this entire house. One of the favorite rooms in the house. This wall is canted, and that one right there, and this is the painting studio for Beth. And just strip fluorescence. This is not an asset project. This is not like, oh, look at me. This is more an agent for them to enjoy this particular place in the world. Now, talking about an asset project, this is maybe on the flip side. This is for the head of Whirlpool. He's German. Bought a beautiful lot in Michigan. I personally didn't work on this, but I'm very happy to kind of walk you through this residence, which has been on many covers of different publications and so forth. It's a series of bars influenced by the vernacular, American vernacular, walkways, little bridges in between. This is koya, which is cooked with vinegar, siding, cedar. The downspouts are let into the rain screen to kind of engage, break the box of what we think of for the building. And so we do a lot of work for some of the most well-heeled people in America. And so, both in Chicago and outside. And so we understand that we are working in a way with the Medicis of our time. And that's okay as long as you can have a discipline that makes a place that it's going to last. The last thing in a sustainable argument is to have something that's going to be torn down because it's not serviceable, it's not beautiful, people don't love it, and it goes away. And so we try to do the things that we do with a fairly high sense of resolve, and whether that's drywall or whether it's a beautiful wood ceiling with metal cabinetry. Okay, So, and again, we're happy to work in any style. Any of your plans should be based on a good functional plan that is flexible ultimately, daylight, and proportion. Those are three things that you can apply to any vocabulary that you can come upon. And those vocabularies can be found in the work that the Rural Studio does, the 20K houses that you may be well aware of. But this is a design program which is designing things for people that have nothing, that grow up in a mobile home that dissolves. This is two of our compatriots, Frank Flory on the left, who runs a design build program at IIT, who is a disciple or an apprentice to Andrew Freer, who just got the gold medal from the New York Architectural League, which is their highest appointment, for the work that he's done, taking over for Sambo Mapi. And so I've been fortunate to be down there for the last 15, 20 years working with their students. And essentially, as you know, with the work that the design build program here is that kind of the big wand and the cape that an architect wears goes quickly away when you're actually having to kind of both not only design it, budget it, solicit funding, build it. You know, that's a great education. Commencement addresses are not required for design build programs because you're already well out of the gate by the time you get out of school. So how do I then take that influence in Rural Studio and apply it to work? Here are, let's say, 15 drawings of a little tiny worker house in Chicago for Green Homes for Chicago, a competition that we won. Was not executed, but we try to take things from Mies, right? Mies had a small building, and so he would float panels within that volume to make it appear that the room is bigger. And whether it's in a traditional garb of limestone and brick, or whether it's clad in metal and hardy panel and so forth, it's the little slab and grade piece over on the side, those are languages that you learn and you kind of carry through. This is Eddie's house. The scale of, this is, I think, this is probably 6'8". It might not even be the code, but you really feel hunkered down when you're sitting on that big covered porch in the hot Alabama sun. And so then how do you bring that into your work? So this was a proposal for Tiny Town. This was supportive housing for kids that have been homeless and they don't want a full house. Our proposal was that you just needed a little dock, a little tent in the city to kind of feel like you're part of a broader community before you then get your legs under you and kind of work out. And so drawing oftentimes in hand versus doing it in Enscape and so forth allows you to understand this is not a finished thing, but that it gives you a sense for, I can see it, it's not all fully resolved, but it's there, and kind of sequentially walking you through as a narrative of how you would live, how you would greet your neighbor that's coming over for coffee or what have you. And so that Eve is then transformed, in this case, not to a kind of a hunkered down, but this is appreciating the socialness of that community space where these individuals that need community are then kind of elevated with their fire and their place to eat outside. This is Iman Healthy Foods. This is in Englewood in Chicago. This is the highest number of fatalities from gunshot are in Englewood. This is at Racine and 63rd Street. We're working with Iman, which is the Inner City Muslim Action Network, which are trying to kind of get the benefit or the blur between the Lithuanians, the African American, and the Muslim community that reside all in this area. And so here again, looking at master planning, construction drawings. And so in this case, we're saving a building. It would be much cheaper to tear it down, but we're saving this building. We're making healthy food where most corner stores in the urban centers are basically the death knell of the community. They bring in salt and sugar into a place. It's a transactional thing. Instantly you go away, you're independent, versus having something where you can sit down and have a cup of coffee. You can actually buy lettuce, you can buy stuff. So that's what this institution is trying to become, a new urban model. And that's under construction. flip side, arts community, my training in art and so forth, an association with painters. This is just a small drawing studio that we did to an existing garage. And this is based on, or influenced by, streams of Donald Judd, Carlos Scarpa, making precials and very intentional moves between them. And then the last arts project I'll show you only in 2 slides is this. Wait for February 20th. Look on Instagram. The Momentary, which is in Bentonville, Arkansas. This is where Alice Walton used to work. It's the old Creek Craft cheese plant. And we've been working on this commission for about probably 4 years now. It opens February 20th. We've been under wraps for 4 years. We can't really talk about it, but it opens. And we get Crystal Bridges, which is the Moshe Safdie project, which is dead American artists, no touch. This is for living American artists, everything to do with touch, eat, smell. So sound artists, culinary artists, and so forth. This is the pre-existing, all our interventions, because this building was literally opaque. There were basically no windows. Every intervention that our office did was in glass. And now this is just the call card for the Momentary, which will be in the New York Times and so forth on February 21st, most probably. Okay, so that's a little bit of work. One more thing, drawing to see. Okay, Gregory had mentioned that, and again, I really do feel that only when we draw do we actually see. Taking an iPhone photograph, yes, you've been there, but have you been there? Have you seen it? That's Frank Harmon, who is good friends with John Galt. I found out last night. And so what do you guys draw with? So, anyone, what do you draw with? Pen, pencil?
Charcoal.
What? Okay, well, we draw with lots of different things, right? A painter paints with brushes or, a sign marker or what have you. We also draw with computers. We draw with those things. Those are tools. But what do we draw with? Do we draw with our hands? Maybe. But maybe what we draw with is our eyes because we're looking around. But ultimately, the thing that we draw with is our head because our head is the thing, the mind is the thing that's telling us, I want emphasis here and I want lightness over here. And so all of these things, when you're actually in the act of pure drawing, you're in a completely three-dimensional kind of experience in time, four-dimensional thing. Okay, so if you go to this castle somewhere in Paris or somewhere in France, you could take an iPhone. This is an old photograph. Take an iPhone photograph of that. Yes, you've been there. But if you turned around, and everyone in this room had the same photograph, right? The bus was there, boom, got it. Okay? But if I asked everyone in this room to do a drawing, you'd have 80, 90 people looking at different ways of interpreting this specific thing. Who did this drawing? Anyone guess? You. This is Lou Kahn. Okay? Lou Kahn. Okay? So, that's a 5-minute sketch. This is not perfectness, right? This is imperfect, but it's perfectly imperfect. Okay, so if you come to Chicago and you go to the Calder, yes, we can run around and we get lots of photographs of the Calder, immense pieces, Federal Center. But if I ask you to take different tools, or each one of you take your sketchbook out, you might be interested in shade and shadow or line and so forth. You might be the lugubrious kind of mood and so forth. And Matisse is going to draw a plant in a very different way than Ellsworth Kelly. My students here, I wish I had stock in these, but this moleskin, for the last 15, 20 years, all I work with is this. It's very discreet. I can sneak it back here. This is a moleskin Japanese album. It's accordion. You can pull it out and you have a film strip of the entire 2 weeks that you did the sketchbook in, right? Versus just opening up one and saying, oh, that's it. So anyway, it's a good tool. Just a tool. Learning how to document where you're placed in the world. The camera will do it, your computer will do it, but do you understand where you are, where your eye level is? I'm 6 foot, so my eye level's at 5'1.5". You know, my wife, Julie, is 5'8", so, you know, she's like 4'7". So her experience of the kitchen sink is very different from mine. Okay, this is a guy you may probably have not heard about. This is in the art world. This is a guy that was deaf, mute, and he was unschooled. And they thought he was stupid, and so they institutionalized this guy. But meanwhile, he tried to figure out his world. So this was his house in Idaho. He did these drawings only using soot from his cook stove and spit. Now I will ask you if these are architectural drawings, if you can feel the light, where you are in perspective, can you smell that experience? And this drawing, I think, is far more emotively connecting than if I took an Instagram photograph of that. And these are imperfect. But again, this is not an architect, but you know, any one of you could take your charcoal and kind of mess with it. I was really particularly taken. Well, this is a series he did, similar to William Christianbury, when he went down to New Bern, Alabama once every couple of years, and he would do a series on that. So returning back, like Morandi returned back and back for all of his models. And here he had all these nomenclatures for, you know, those are trees, but it's just like this big block of stuff. A tree is not a stick with a thing. And if you look at a tree, you will find out that a tree is not a stick with a big ball on top. And when he died, all these people said, "Oh, James Castle, let's restore his shed." And so they opened up and found that all of his drawings were shoved inside of the stud work in the house. And he had so many of them, it was just crammed full. Drawing. What's this? Vietnam Memorial. Okay, this was the narrative that Maya Lin convinced Harry Weiss, who was one day late getting to the jury, and all the rest of the jurors had discounted it. And Harry Weiss was a week or a day late, went through and pulled this thing out. And Harry Weiss from Chicago was the guy that made this project happen by promoting it. But anyway, this is a charcoal drawing. It's a monument right there. So it's a very clear narrative, and it didn't need 3D representation to kind of do it. So here you've got Pezo Van Elixen down in Peru. And yeah, they do very highly resolved, very geometric, perfect buildings, perfect geometry. But it's interesting that when they show their work, when it's published, they're most interested in the drawing, the shape, the shadows, and so forth. They are brought forth by that kind of dignity or that kind of discipline. And so these little thumbnail sketches are a great way to start your presentation of your ambition of the project. And yes, of course, you're going to bring all the technical firepower as it moves along. This is Peter Markley. This is an imperfect building. If you look, there's weird, random kind of column spacings and so forth. And where does this draw from? His drawing of concern of perfection. Swiss architecture is all about perfection. And they can deliver it because, boy, they're Swiss. They got good watches and stuff. And so, in essence, he is trying to find a way to kind of purposely, consciously break that. And so this is his drawings. Plan drawings, elevation drawings, iterations. And so again, I'm not speaking just of like, you know, this is not just me. It's like the community you're joining is consciously, for their lifetime, not sure of what they're doing. And they're trying to figure it out. This is Andrew Geller, right? This is Andrew Geller in 1960, Southampton. This is the way he grew, right? This is a far better drawing of like, you know, okay, I've just ridden my bike up here, I've lashed into it, I dropped my shoes off, I got my cups right there, I'm going up there. This is everything in one little vignette. Here's a guy, this is Bonet out of Barcelona. underneath the ribs and pit La Pedrera. This is the built work, but this is where this was the ambition. This is where he started. Is this a perfect perspective? No. Does it have color? Yes. Does it have lock? Yes. But again, this idea of kind of working through ideas is something that you can't do in a computer, in my opinion. Now, another subject I want to talk about just ever so briefly is this idea that there's the 3 dimensions. There's also the time. And so there is this 4th dimension that our buildings are built, that they actually last, and that they change over time. And the best time to photograph a building is not when it's done, but 10 years later. So time can be done in sketches. This might be a walk through the streets of Rome, finding other things along that path. These drawings that's a yellow sticky, so that's about 1 inch square. So your drawings don't have to be all that big. Might introduce propolis, you might introduce some color on a moment to say, hey, I'm not interested in shade and shadow, I'm interested in color. And then what does this slide have to do with it? Well, again, this is Julie, who's here. And about 8 years ago, she got ill. And she got leukemia, this weird stuff. And she was close to dying. The first thing the doctors asked me is if I had the powers of attorney. And so it was a scary year that we went through, and it was a wonderful year. Our family came together. Julie ended up having a stem cell transplant, half of which was supplied by our son, and half by an umbilical cord from North Carolina. We don't know who. It was, I believe, female, but a different blood type than Julie had. And so we were sitting here as a family, just like freaking out. Here's Julie, just freaking out in a terrible hospital room. And I'm freaking out, what can I do? And so what I ended up doing is saying, hey, what can I bring to kind of soften this and keep the lifeline going? And so in essence, I drew on every surface of the wall in the room by papering it and drawing our house, our pepper mills, our paint by numbers, our cat. Everything was a sensorially rich thing, and just like looking around. And hopefully, I mean, this was my way of dealing with grief and concern and so forth. Anyway, everything turned out great. Julie, the stem cell work, 8 years, perfect blood, different blood than she has. I mean, it's different makeup than she had. They killed every piece of blood in her, and now she makes a different type of blood. But here we are in Morocco, we're in Spain looking at olives, and we're enjoying life, which architects need to enjoy life and experience new things, whether they're contemporary or traditional, meet great architects, eat these weird foods. Here's a dish that came where it was all fried, and this fish had its tail in its head. This is Julie's doctor, Wendy Stock, who's married to an architect who runs Oliver and Root. And here I am, meanwhile, I can't deal with stuff, so I'm just drawing. My influence of my parents growing up, these hunkered down Scandinavian pieces. We built this little farmhouse. This is the farmhouse. We didn't dare do right, and you can't replicate right, but we could replicate certain aspects of the project. We were certainly aware of right when working on this. We were certainly aware of this image when we were working on that. Books, again, books, sound, they're musicians. The cook stove that came from Scandinavia. There's Daniel, who was just, this guy retired as a civil engineer. He was the guy that did all the metal things for Thorncrown Chapel. He and his wife were the metal workers that did that. Met Fay Jones. Fay Jones said, oh, you should go and become a civil engineer. He became a partner at Thornton Tomasetti, and then he retired at age 65, and now he's working full-time raising animals. I'm sorry I used 54 minutes.
We have a bit of time if you want to ask some questions, if you have any questions you can. Please feel
Happy to answer anything.
Avoiding how a lot of community architecture would have like a negative impact, unintended. Is there really any major problem that you see with the way that architects practice today that you think that maybe we should be, as students, looking into?
Great question. I think what I found as I've matured is the biggest lack that architects generally have is empathy. Okay? Of getting outside of yourself and saying, okay, this is what I want, this is what architects do, and so this is, this will make my client happy. You have to be able to be empathetic not only to your client, but then also the community that you're working with, to make sure that they feel like they have been heard, they have a voice in the participation. And I can tell you it's going to be a richer project because you've heard that voice and tried to defend it or modify the solution to make it kind of work. If you just come in and say, I mean, I absolutely despise architects that have I would say I despise architects that literally airdrop projects into communities that they have no understanding about their climate and so forth. It's just, they want one of mine, so this is, or ours, and we're going to drop it in. And there's too much of that going on. The world is losing authenticity. When you've got Starbucks in Rome and you've got, it's just flattening the playing field, and so trying to kind of make authentic places that, like Len Murcott, he basically just works in a little area in Australia. Peter Zumthor used to just work above 10,000 feet. Now he's coming down, and again, his office is busy. There's only so much Peter you can get, so it's getting a little bit thin. I think the same evidence is with Tadao Ando. I think that his earlier work was unbelievable, and as he's gotten, it just grows. So we're anxious to keep things small. Do the things as slowly as you can. Try to emphasize to clients that, hey, we need to have a little bit more time to look at other options, and then respond as if it's a life and death situation and try to work as quickly as possible. Because in essence, in schematic design, we ultimately are making within maybe 2, 3, maybe you're fortunate to have 6 weeks of schematic design for like the initial concepts, the read of the problem. And that read is going to then carry out for another 100 years if the building is built well. And so if you imagine an emergency room doctor and you're bringing in the client, what are you going to do? And so you can't operate just by yourself. You need your colleagues. You bring in your colleagues, your nurses, all this stuff. You bring in your anesthesiologists, all your consultants, the acoustician, the structural engineer, and you try to have them all focus on that particular problem to kind of make it right. Once you've got the schematic design, the narrative set, then the processing of the construction drawings, design development, that all is actually more the procedure. It's not like the brain power that is going to be imprinted from day one. And so I would say that that is the area where, emotionally it's taxing, because again, I am not a confident guy. I'm slow. We draw lots of different things to build the confidence that we're seeing it correctly. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. One more question.
Oh my God, where do you make those? Where do you room for that?
Great question. This is like, fantastic question. Okay, we just, again, you have to come to our office. We just finished a slight expansion to the office where we do have now a full wood shop and so forth, drill press. We also have laser cutters and CNC cutters, and we've got 4 or 5 maker bots and stuff. But the actual physicality, I was telling Milo and the group last night, we have 155 freshman students at UIC. They came in, the first question I asked was how many people had ever built a model? Not a hand in the room went up, right? And I am of the generation, probably, maybe, some of you might have been fortunate to also say, yeah, I built a model, I built a model plane or something. No one raised their hand because everyone's working on this and doing the SimCity and all that kind of stuff, and they think they're architects. You have to build stuff physical. If you're doing a studio about concrete, get a chunk of concrete and carry it around in your pocket for a semester, right? Or a piece of brick or CLT, and you will feel what happens. You'll already expedite that passage of time after 2 months of CLT in your hand. It's going to be all glossy because of the oils of your hand. There's a great mosque in Cordova, Spain, where it's a perfect mosque, everything is perfectly, but then there's these granite columns, and all the granite columns are like from this point down, they're all glistening and they're dark. And why? Because there's been centuries of people that have gone in and kind of leaned up against them and stuff, and they've just aged in place, and it builds this kind of human level that you can kind of, so patina is great. Don't build a building where it's not going to age well. Gothic cathedrals were great because there was smoke and soot and coal in the air, and when it rained, and if the rain went back into the corners got really super dark. Everything else in the sun was Bristol white, and it accentuated the whole idea of that type of structure. So build buildings that are also, and building full-size mock-ups, and so we can experience them, clients can. There's nothing better than that. Okay, I'm happy to answer any other questions after this, or thank you for your patience. I know it ran long.